I think a lot of people don't actually understand how God changes people. I certainly didn't until I experienced it. During late high school and early college, I was going through some version of what's now called the meaning crisis. I didn't have a good idea of what I wanted to do with my life, or even how I would go about answering that question. I enjoyed music and spent most of my time either playing or listening to music, so I decided to pursue that in college. In a way, I punted some of the meaning questions by diving into something that I enjoyed and was relatively good at. But the meaning crisis hit me in a deeper way when a relationship with a high school girlfriend fell apart. My 19-year-old self had trouble figuring out what was my life about without that relationship. Why was I doing the things that I was doing? After being invited by some friends, I ended up turning to the church and exploring again the faith that I grew up with. That journey ended up making my life rich with meaning. But what I've realized in retrospect is that a meaningful life requires the transformation of the individual, and transformation often takes time. I think fermentation is a great way to understand how God changes people. So let's make some ginger beer while we reflect on this. We'll start by cultivating wild yeast in a ginger bug, basically a sourdough starter for ginger beer. In a glass container, combine 2 cups of filtered water, 2 tablespoons or 22 grams of finely chopped ginger, and 2 tablespoons or 28 grams of granulated sugar. Stir until the sugar dissolves, cover with cheesecloth, and let it sit out at room temperature. Now you're going to feed it every 24 hours with the same amount of ginger and sugar until it becomes fizzy. You'll know when it's ready because you'll be able to hear it fizzing. One of the problems that we face because of sin is disordered desires. All of our desires exist in a hierarchy, and they're nested within desires that are more important to us. My desire to stay up late and watch a movie needs to submit to my desire to get a good night's sleep, which is usually more important to me. And I want that because I don't want to be tired the next day. I want to have energy to engage with people, to be a good husband and father. So these desires all exist in a hierarchy, and at the top of that hierarchy should be something like honoring God with the way I live, or pursuing deeper union with Christ. But what if the movie gets pushed too far up the hierarchy? Then I'll stay up late, I'll probably be tired the next day, and that'll make me more irritable and less patient with the people around me. When our sinful flesh pulls desires out of their proper place in the hierarchy, we're not able to live a meaningful life in the way we want to. This is what Paul is talking about in Romans 7 when he writes, "I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do." So a meaningful life requires the reordering of our hierarchy of desires. And this is where we need to understand how God changes people. There are plenty of dramatic conversion stories out there, so there's evidence that God can change people in an instant. But more often than not, transformation happens over time, and that's certainly been true for me. I've made some big decisions to order my life under God, like deciding to work in Christian ministry after graduating from college. But it's the repeated liturgies in my life that have most shaped the hierarchy of my desires. The Anglican tradition of the daily office or the evangelical practice of a daily quiet time emerged from a common understanding of how people change. Our desires drift away from God and get shifted out of order, so we need to regularly return God to the top of the hierarchy and let everything else fall into place under God. That's one of the reasons I created a unique Advent devotional to help you engage this season in a reflective and embodied way. And if you haven't gotten it yet, click the link in the description to download the free PDF. If it's the repeated liturgies that shape us, then most of the ways that God changes people will be unseen in the short term. That's why fermentation helps us understand this, because change takes time. To make some ginger beer, add 2 quarts of water to a large pot, along with a 1/4 cup or 54 grams of finely chopped ginger, the juice of 3 lemons, and between 170 and 270 grams of sugar. That's 1/2 cup to 1 1/4 cups. I'm going on the high end of that range because my wife will want it sweet for Moscow mules. Bring to a boil, then reduce heat and simmer for 5 minutes. Then turn off the heat and let it cool completely to room temperature. This will take a while, but be patient so you don't kill the yeast in your ginger bug. Strain through a fine mesh strainer and add 1/2 cup of strained ginger bug. You could also add other flavorings here if you want to experiment. Transfer this to some flip-top bottles, leaving ample room in each one so you don't get an overflow if it fizzes up later. Then close them up and let them sit out at room temperature, making sure to pop open the top to burp them once a day, or they will eventually explode. You can taste them after a few days, and once they reach your desired level of fizziness, move them to the fridge and enjoy. I said earlier that meaning requires transformation, and that's because it takes time for our desires to shift so that God is at the top of the hierarchy and everything else falls into its rightful place underneath. But when that happens, the whole world is alive with meaning because it exists in relation to God. The pop culture idea of Christianity is that we're waiting for this idea of heaven where we'll float around on clouds. But when I started to understand that Christians look forward to the resurrection of the body, it changed how I live and how I see the world. This is why I get so excited about food, because this pleasure in the things we eat and drink isn't just a gift from God. It also points us to our ultimate satisfaction in God Himself. So go make some ginger beer and use the process to reflect on how God has been changing you. And if you haven't seen my first fermentation video, go check that out to see why patience is central to being a Christian. Cheers.